G11. This is term 2, week 2, and we're starting a new lesson, chapter 3, section 2, the agricultural revolution. Previously, last week, we discussed the beginning of the Paleolithic age, and we said that the Paleolithic age is the Stone Age, and that the Paleolithic age was divided into two, the first or the Old Stone Age and the New Stone Age, which was known as the Neolithic age. During the Neolithic times, after the Ice Age ended, Earth's temperatures started rising again. As the climate got warm, many nomads moved into areas with mild climate and fertile land. For the first time, people began staying in one place to grow grains and vegetables. During the Paleolithic times, we said that the nomads moved from one place to another in search of food. When the Ice Age came and they settled for a while, it became too cold. They couldn't endure the cold weather, so they started moving through Beringia to North America. When the weather got warmer, they accidentally discovered farming. While the women were collecting seeds, they would drop some other seeds into the soil, and next year or next season, when they returned to collect seeds and berries again, they would find extra plants that grew. So they started growing their own grains and vegetables. When farming began, it replaced hunting and gathering as the main source of food. People also began to domesticate animals instead of hunting them. So instead of running after the animal, hunting it, killing it, and eating it, using its bones, skin, and fat, they started to domesticate the animal. Domesticate an animal means turning a wild animal into a tamed one. So instead of killing the cow or bull or bison, they would domesticate it, turning it into a tamed animal and using it. They would use the animals, domesticated animals, for transportation, for meat, milk, and wool. They also started using the animals for breeding so that they can get their babies and have more and more domesticated animals. The change in the way people lived marked the beginning of the new Neolithic age, which is the new Stone Age. Humans went from being nomadic and hunters to settling in one place and learning how to grow crops. It began about 8000 BC and it lasted around 4000 BC, which means that the Neolithic age lasted for 4000 years. As you said previously, the word Neolithic is Greek and it means the new Stone Age. Why do we call it new? Because they changed from nomads and hunters to settlers, or they changed from hunting and gathering into farming. Historians call the settled farming, the new Neolithic age, as the agricultural revolution. Humans lived differently once they learned how to grow crops and to tame animals. They no longer had to stay in big groups of 20s and 30s. Each group started to get separated according to how they wanted to live and the crops they wanted to grow and the animals they wanted to tame. This allowed the population to grow at a faster rate. They settled in one place, they grew crops, they tamed animals, they produced food, they started building their houses. They did not have to move from one place to the other. Some historians consider the agricultural revolution as the most important event in human history. Now, during the Neolithic age, we said that they started growing their own crops. There are certain regions around the world where they grew different crops. In Southwest Asia, they started growing wheat and barley. They also domesticated pigs, cows, goats, and sheep. In Africa, they grew wheat, barley, yam, and bananas. In northern China, they grew a grain which was known as millet and rice. They domesticated dogs and pigs. In Mexico and Central America, they grew corn, squash, and potatoes, and they domesticated chickens and dogs. The Neolithic people built permanent homes near fields so that the people could plant crops and they can also settle near water sources, especially rivers, for irrigation and farming. The Neolithic villages developed throughout Europe, India, Egypt, China, and Mexico. These were the first places of the first communities that settled. In the Neolithic communities, one of the most famous one was Catalhuyuk, which was present day in Turkey. The people who lived there had houses, but these houses did not have front doors, as you can see in the pictures. Instead, people entered their houses through holes in the rooftops. They also had special buildings that were shrines or temples. These shrines were decorated with images of gods and goddesses. So, what were the benefits of a settled life? The Neolithic Age, the Agricultural Revolution, the New Stone Age. What were the benefits of settling in one place and not moving after food? The first benefit or advantage was that the settled life created a greater security. Instead of moving from one place to another, not having a place to live in, not having the same house or shelter to keep you in, they now settle in one place like a small city or a small country, a small community where they all live together, which provided the first advantage, which is security. Because they settled in the same place, they had a more settled life. The population increased. They no longer die because of traveling or moving without food or low food supply or animals that attack them. So the population started increasing. This is advantage number two. Number three, when the villagers started producing, farming, and they started producing more crops than they could eat, they began trading with their food supply that they could not produce themselves. So they settled, they started farming and growing crops. They started farming more that they need because now they know the tactics and when exactly to farm, the right time and the right weather. So they started having surplus or extra amount of food. This extra amount of food, they would keep it aside and they would trade with the nearby people for other crops that they did not have. After trading, for the first time, the fourth advantage, specialization occurred. Specialization means that they now have free empty time. They do not have to run after animals. They do not have to run from one place to another to find a good shelter or good source of food. They have the farming, they have the stable source of food. So now they have extra free time. This extra free time allowed people to explore their talents and find other jobs other than farming. These other jobs included making weapons, jewelry, and pottery. So, the four advantages again of a settled life were number one, security, two, increase in population, three, trading with the nearby areas, and four, specialization. The last advantage was that the role of women and men changed. Instead of each one was responsible for a certain task, they both became responsible for protecting the family, for protecting the village. Men were previously responsible for hunting and gathering, for hunting animals and killing them. Now they became the family community leaders, and women, instead of taking care of the settlement and collecting seeds and berries, they started staying at home and having children. Women also wove clothes to make wool, from wool to make clothing. Every time frame has its ending. The Neolithic Age started ending. During the Neolithic Age or the late Neolithic Age, people made more technological advances other than farming, trading, population increasement, and security. They started developing tools. Hoes were invented for digging soil. This is a picture of a hoe. Sickles were used for cutting grains. They were like hooked knives. Millstones for grinding flour. People also began to work with metals like copper. They used copper to make tools and weapons. They also discovered that mixing copper and tin formed bronze. This last discovery marked the end of the Neolithic Age and the beginning of a new time frame, which was known as the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age lasted from 3000 BC to 1200 BC, which was another 15 or 1400 years, 1800 to be exact. When the Bronze Age started, or by the beginning of the Bronze Age, the communities were widespread. They started spreading all over the earth. Four major civilizations started emerging around 3000 BC: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China, and we will discuss each and every empire in detail. All of these civilizations shared similar characteristics during that time. One characteristic of these early civilizations was that they developed cities and governments. The first civilizations developed was on river valleys. They had fertile land, so it was easy to grow crops, and they provided fish and water. People formed governments to protect themselves and their food supplies. And the first form of these governments were monarchies. Also, these communities had religion, which was a new thing. In the new civilizations, religion helped people explain their lives. It also helped explain the forces of nature and the role of humans in the world. The rulers also claimed that their own power was based on the approval of gods. The early civilizations had social class structures. People in the society were organized into groups. Usually, in the hierarchy or the highest chain were the rulers and priests. Next came the government officials. Third came the warriors. And at the bottom of the social structure was a large group of free people, including farmers, artisans, and the craftspeople. The lowest class of the social structure were the enslaved people, whom were captured from the enemies during the war. To pass on information, the people invented ways of writing. They used symbols in place of letters and words. The people used the writing to keep accurate records and to pass history and preserve their stories from one generation to the other. Finally, during these civilizations, art developed. This time, art was not for passing on history only, it was also for enjoyment. Artists created paintings and sculptures portraying gods and forces of nature. Also, people designed massive buildings that served as places of worship and burials for tombs and kings. So, to revise quickly, the beginning of the Bronze Age was about the development of four civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China. These civilizations were known had similar characteristics. What were these similar characteristics? Number one, cities. The cities were formed near river valleys. They had fertile land, which was easy to grow crops, providing fish and water. Number two, or the second common characteristic, was the government. People formed the government to protect themselves and their food supplies. The government was a monarchy, or one person was responsible for the whole civilization. The third characteristic was religion. Religion was a form to explain their lives, to explain the forces of nature, to explain the role of humans in the world, and rulers were approved by the gods. The fourth common characteristic was that there was a social structure in each civilization. The highest part or the highest level of the social hierarchy was the ruler and priests. Next came the government officials, and then the warriors. Came after them the free people, who included the farmers, artisans, and craftspeople. And at the very bottom of the pyramid or the social structure were the enslaved people, where they got them from the captured enemies during the war. The fifth common characteristic was writing. During these civilizations, people started writing. They invented different ways of writing, they invented different symbols. These symbols were used as letters and words. They used the writing to keep records and preserve their stories, passing them from one generation to the other. The final common characteristic between all of these new civilizations during the Bronze Age was art. Art was used for several reasons. It was used for enjoyment. They created paintings and sculptures. They portrayed the gods and the forces of nature. And finally, they designed massive buildings that were later on used for shrines and temples for worshipping and tombs to bury the kings and the higher people of the authority. This was Chapter 2, Section 3, the Neolithic Age or the Agricultural Revolution. If you have any questions, please take notes so we can discuss them during our online session. Thank you.